All right, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. Gabe, Giannis, and I, we are joined by Dennis Marshall. We're filming this one in person in California. Dennis is joining us from the great state of New York. He is a husband, he's a father, he's a badass gym owner, and he's also the author of our Force program here at Train Hard. And I am super excited to chat with you. And Gabe, good morning.
Second time on the podcast, too.
Second time. He's a returning, not returning customer, but returning whatever.
Podcaster.
Yeah. Podcaster.
Yeah. Rarefied air.
Yep. And this is the first time we were using these type of headsets. You said you felt a little bit uncomfortable using the headsets we're currently using.
I feel like I'm wearing a Halloween mask.
I don't know where you came up with the Halloween mask. There's no mask in front of us. But anyways, we're riffing. We're getting together to talk about, we're going to do a lot of training today. And to kick it off, we're like, dude, let's just podcast about what's going on with Force, what's going on at Train Hard. And
yeah, I mean, I wanted to dive into training specifically a little more. Last time we talked about, like a little bit of your background on seminar staff and dad stuff and father stuff, all stuff that if people want to listen to, definitely go back and listen to that episode. But this is all like coming full circle for me in like a really cool way, because I mentioned this on the last episode. I started CrossFit Garden City. Awesome. Like, spent until 2016 there, moved to California, and now having you back here in California recording with Jason, all kind of comes full circle. But recently you took over the Force program on the Train Hard app.
Yep.
But I think that it's interesting. You bring a really interesting perspective to training in general. And I think that that's what we wanted to talk about and how that's coming to life in the programming. And then I think that me and Jason talk about this all the time, but just kind of how our evolution in training and how we actually approach the gym and what we want to do, strength conditioning, this and that. But I think it's really cool how the Force program has come to life now in simplifying it a little bit, splitting things up. So I think a good place to start is we recently put a new template in that the Force program kind of runs on.
Yep.
Can you explain that in just broad strokes, how it is that you're approaching programming every week, and then we can just go from there?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, I mean, we look at all the different capacities that we're trying to develop, right, within that particular module of the program. And so what we were doing, I believe, prior to that, was kind of training all of them concurrently within the same sessions, and that's a fairly typical model that we'll encounter within the CrossFit world, let's just say, right, where we have all these capacities that we want to develop: strength, aerobic capacity, everything in between. And the thought process over time has kind of evolved to think, well, let's just try to develop all of these things in one individual session, right, and pack as much as we possibly can into that. And that's become a fairly popular model, I think, that we encounter within our community. And I think we had a good hard look at like the avatar of the person that we're trying to train through the Force programming, and recognizing that like they need to have certainly capacities across the board within that spectrum, but they also need to be able to function outside the walls of the gym, right? And so we're preparing them for life. We're preparing them to be better fathers, better husbands, better caretakers for their family, better employees, whatever the case may be. And if we pour too much work into one individual session, it's going to simply be unrealistic for them to be able to sustain that and still function accordingly outside of the gym, right? So, looking at that, we had a conversation with Matt Delavalli, MDV.
MDV.
I might have just butchered his last name. Sorry, Matt. I don't think I've ever said his last name out loud. With MDV, and we had a good conversation around like this idea that we want to have a little bit more structure and a little bit more of a templated approach, so that we're ensuring that each week we're covering each of those capacities, but each individual session has a very clear intent and focus to just prioritize one of them at a time, right? And so over the course of a week, we have the ability to still work on strength training, get some good hypertrophy work in. We also have the ability to focus on some anaerobic power, like some high-powered intervals, so people can kind of like push their top-end threshold in terms of output. But then we also have a very clear focus, at least once a week, to just develop straight-up aerobic capacity and just stretch people out to work and to create workouts that stretch them out 30, 40 minutes of just like nice, slow, steady, constant duration. And so, I think it's hard to say whether or not it's been successful at this point. It's fairly new, but so far the feedback has been great. from the people that have been following the program. I think from my own experience, just programming it, it really just makes everything neater to ensure that everything that you want to cover is being covered over the course of a week, 2 weeks, call it a month.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. Something I think about a lot is like, I can't be so wrecked that I can't like play pickleball with my son last night. You know what I mean? And so I think when you're looking at the Force program, which by the way, like we have a variety of programs available on the Train Hard app. Force is our strength and conditioning foundation. I'd say it has its roots in CrossFit, but it's kind of a little bit different from that in terms of the complexity and the type of movements we incorporate. Mm-hmm. But I love the idea that like at the heart of what we're trying to accomplish is you're not trying to put together a program that's just going to smash people in the face every day, all day. You're trying to put together a program that's going to help people be better protectors and providers and be able to go do stuff with their kids. And anyways, I love it, man. I use Force on a regular basis, and I think it's a great program. So thanks for making that happen.
Yeah, of course.
When you say, though, that like, can't really tell if it's successful yet, I think that one of the things that I like to think about Flex, which I write, is that like, the success is the fact that like that's how I train and I feel great and I'm seeing the results that I want to see. How close is how you're approaching Force now with how you train now, and how have you gotten like what has that evolution been like? Because you've been in CrossFit for forever.
Sure. Yep. Good
you used to like do the thing that made you taste metal in your mouth five days a week.
Yeah.
How did you get to the point where you're at now, and how close is that to how you're writing the program?
Yeah. So I mean. Certainly the way that I train is heavily influencing and heavily influenced by that whole idea that I just kind of outlined, right? So similar to what Jason's experience has been, like you recognize that if you try to pour too much into one session and try to accomplish too much, first of all, a lot of it just kind of gets watered down, in terms of like the actual stimulus that you're providing yourself and the actual benefit you'll get from that training session if you try to cram too much into it. But it also leaves you largely ineffective throughout the rest of the day in all other areas of your life. So, as I've aged up in terms of training age and experience doing this stuff, there's been a very natural evolution of like, okay, I need to pare down certain components of each training session to ensure that it's like enough of a stimulus that I'm still going to benefit from it. It's going to be an appropriate amount of intensity and volume that I can handle and recover from in a given session, and then be able to come back tomorrow and repeat that same type of effort, just with the intention of it, being a slightly different stimulus, right? So my training largely looks exactly like the way that I'm programming for Force now. And that's consistent with my gym as well. I run CrossFit Garden City, and we've evolved our programming as such over the years to more kind of resemble how we're programming for Force as well.
And if you're not watching this on video, I just got to say, okay, Gabe, he's like, I don't know, 28, pretty jacked.
I'm 33.
33.
Thanks.
Pretty jacked.
Same thing.
And he's definitely, he's getting ready for a marathon. So he's putting in the work, and we're both doing high rocks. But Dennis is 46 and he is straight jacked. And it's a good example of like, dude, if it's working for me, I want to put this out to the world, right? Like, so for me, when I look at the programming, like I just follow what you guys are putting out, and then I feel good about my performance. But I mean, dude, the proof is in the pudding, and the fact that your training has evolved, maybe the duration in the gym, and maybe even your effort slightly, the way it's adjusted, but yet the proof is in the pudding. You can still do stuff with your kids. You still look the part for sure. And so, I guess I just wanted to validate both of you guys sitting here.
I feel small standing here next to you, though, Jay.
Oh, come on.
The interesting thing, too, is so I've been back to New York a handful of times. I have to go back for like family stuff. We always have something going on. And like my must visit is CrossFit Garden City to get a workout in with Dennis. And the interesting thing is like I've gotten some awesome sessions when we work out together. Mm-hmm. We don't do that much on paper. Like if you were to write the session of like what we did last time, we did some strongman stuff, what we did the time before, like a little bit of a pump session.
Yeah.
On paper, we're doing like 2-3 supersets, we're warming up and we're doing a little bit. And I know that's how you train. And we get like super effective sessions. Like we're done and I'm like, you want to do anything else? You want to do anything else? No. And it works. And I think that that's been a big part of me maturing with my training, because back in the day, it was like literally how much can you do in the day?
Yep.
Like you do a Metcon, you do some Olympic weightlifting, then you're going to do this. And then do you guys want to go do GHD double unders and handstand walks? You know, like how much
Finisher.
more can you do versus like now, both because like constrained on time, right? Like you have a family, you also just don't have the 8 hours to spend on Sunday at the gym, but also like you feel so much better when you can put like a very dedicated, intense effort to the thing that you're doing, a lot of focus, but not trying to do like a lot. Because a lot of the times when we were doing all of this training, by the end, and I know the term is what, junk volume, like yes, you're working out, but like you're too like systemically fatigued to get the stimulus that you actually need to get anything.
Yeah,
To
like mentally
improve
and physically, right? Like you've hit your limit. It's kind of like jujitsu. I know that, we got Gabe a little bit into it, but people who do jujitsu can relate to this. It's like you'll learn a new skill like in training session, and then your instructor or whatever will want to add like 5 more. But at that point, I just like kind of walk away and I just try and focus on that one, because if you overdo it, it starts to like nullify your overall training session because you get overly stimulated. Like physically and like mentally, I cannot take that session and say that I optimize it if I do too much in jiu-jitsu. Same thing with tactical training. It's the same idea. A little bit different in fitness but if you're trying to learn new skills, if you go over and over too much and try and learn too many new skills on a given day, it's just too much for your brain to comprehend, your body to get adaptation from, I think.
And the other thing that I've experienced, knowing you for now over 10 years is, and we were talking about this last time we worked out together, the fact that like, I've never, sure, you get banged up every now and then, but like you're one of the people I know that it never is like, oh man, like I have this knee thing and I can't work out for 2 months, or I have this back thing and whatever. And I think part of that is, and we talked about this the first time we had you on the podcast, like striking when the iron's hot, but also just being smart about your training and not more is more, but less is more, actually allows you to train more throughout that decade. So if you look at how much training you've been able to do, or anyone that follows a program that isn't trying to jam too much in, over the course of an actual decade, you are actually doing more than the person that's trying to do 90 minutes a day for 3 months, and then they either get hurt or burnt out or whatever, and now they have to take 2 months away. You just catch up little by little, and it's playing the long game. And I think that's what we try and do with everything on the Train Hard app, because it's not, how hard can we go preparing you for something super specific in 3 months? It's, hey, this is the type of training that we want you to do. 30s,
Definitely.
40s, coming up on 50s. Just kidding. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, like there's sort of this mantra that I've always adhered to, and I continue to try to adhere to, which, intensity is where you will develop the adaptation, and volume is the amplifier for that. So whatever adaptation you're seeking from your training, intensity is ultimately what's going to cause that adaptation. The volume that you put in will amplify that adaptation, and you only want to accumulate as much volume as you need to in order to elicit the appropriate adaptation, right? And any volume beyond that is going to actually dampen the adaptation and have the opposite effect of what you want it to have, right? So there's this point of diminishing returns, whether it's learning a new skill, whether it's trying to develop a certain physical capacity, strength, endurance, whatever it is, where intensity is what causes the adaptation, and then you only need as much volume, and really what's appropriate is the minimal effective dose to elicit the adaptation that you want. Any volume beyond that is going to just ultimately dampen the effect. It'll dampen your ability to recover and be able to repeat that same effort the next day. So you always have to keep that in mind.
I like that.
Yeah.
So obviously, if someone's following Force, we take care of that for you because you're writing it with those appropriate doses. But how can someone on their own training or with whatever programming they're following, how do you know when you're starting to like go into these waters of like, I'm not getting a benefit from this anymore?
Yeah.
Is there anything like tactical people can keep in mind, like something they should be feeling, not feeling? I know it's almost an impossible question to answer, but any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, it's more. I think it's more mental. I think the initial response will be more psychological and mental versus physical. In terms of like just general excitement and motivation to actually put the training in will be the first sign that like the volume is starting to take its toll in terms of your ability to properly recover. I mean, there's physical symptoms of all of that as well. But I think you can overcome a lot of those depending upon the mentality that you have. So I think the mental dampening in terms of your willingness to train hard is going to be what's going to be the first sign that you're probably pushing the volume a little too high.
Yeah. And you've been in the trenches for, when did you open your gym? 2009?
2010.
2010.
Yep.
And how many seminars have you taught for CrossFit?
Like 300, I think, at this point. Yeah.
Dude, so for people who are listening who don't know Dennis Marshall, just take this into consideration. Not only has he owned a gym since 2010 and watched, hundreds of thousands of athletes over the last, over a decade come through your doors.
Yeah.
But now you're traveling the world for 300 seminars. So that's like one a weekend, like one every other weekend for the last however many years. And you're getting to see a lot of different people and a lot of different looks. And so when you talk, I love to listen because you're not just talking about it from a vacuum. Like you've been out in the trenches seeing it, and we have as well. But it's like, dude, I love your feedback about this idea. Like intensity is the initial step, but then volume becomes like this regulator. And if you go too much, there's going to be diminishing returns. And you're seeing that firsthand, not only in your gym, but across the country. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody recognizes just how like powerful what Dennis is talking about is, because he's seeing it on a wide scale, not just in a single location.
Yeah. And I think what volume ends up doing is it's an excuse not to really work that hard. You can make an excuse for not going too hard in terms of intensity by just doing more stuff, right? So there's some sort of like psychological component involved with that process where people need to sort of like satisfy or scratch some kind of itch in terms of the amount of work they put in. But all along, really what they're doing is just providing themselves with an excuse to really not push themselves that hard and just lighten the intensity, where that's really what's going to cause the adaptation that they're seeking.
Yeah. Julian Pinot brought this up beautifully when he was saying that that's why people will like want to do the 40-minute hero workout with like 5 different movements, bunch of transition, bunch of chances to like chalk up and stuff, but they won't do Helen, right? Like they'll shy away from that. That's not enough, right? Like it's a 12, 13-minute workout, but like that's the dose that people need. Again, not every day, but definitely every now and then, not the 40, 50-minute, like that serves a purpose too, but there's a very easy way to like go through the motions in that and not really like hit that stimulus that people do need once a week.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I remember. Yeah. He was, what else was really popular for a while in the gym. And I think it's been broken down, especially through CrossFit now, is like, you'd always have people who wanted to go heavier. And oftentimes when you go heavier, it actually makes it a little bit easier because you can't get that same, you can't move as fast.
Yeah. Gives you a reason to stop.
Like yesterday I was doing this workout with the 80-pound sandbag. And the reason why the 80-pound sandbag is so miserable is it's heavy enough where it's like, damn. But it's not heavy enough where you can't keep moving, like you could keep moving. Yeah. I was doing sets of 20 on a deadlift and it's like, oh, this sucks. But if I was 150, I would have done like 3 and then stopped. So yeah, intensity is definitely a factor. When you're thinking about our programs, especially for force, like I guess when you're looking at it from a tempo perspective, like what role do you think everybody should be doing tempo? Like unless someone wants to compete in a powerlifting competition, do you see no role in the future for a 1 rep max?
Yeah, I think the role of a 1 rep max is fairly limited for the average person, right? So I mean, it certainly is a decent gauge of progress, perhaps. But there's a certain aspect of just like the risk versus reward ratio doesn't really work out for the average person to try to test their 1 rep max in most lifts. So generally, if you're going to be looking to test strength, you'd want to stay in the probably 3 to 5 rep range, if not even higher for some populations, depending upon their training age, their experience level, their skill set. And I think the role that tempo plays in developing strength that'll push those repetition maxes higher is the ability to control the weight and not have the weight control them, and develop positional strength throughout the entire range of motion. Yeah. That'll translate in terms of their ability to actually like develop high amounts of force production throughout that particular lift, right? So if you have if you don't utilize tempo, and this isn't an absolute statement, but you can avoid certain sticking points, you can avoid certain weak areas of the lift positionally for people. A great example of that with squatting is just being able to bounce out of the bottom, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
or bench press, even just driving off the chest.
Exactly.
I mean, I do that for sure.
Yeah. And there's something to be said for just like moving weight from point A to point B.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, but to develop through the use of tempo, to develop true control of the full range of motion under load, will have long-term benefits that'll ultimately make people stronger across the board, across all rep ranges. So it's incredibly valuable. And just in terms of the amount of stress you put on the joints will probably be mitigated a little bit if you really control through a nice slow eccentric component. You're putting more stress on the muscle, so it tends to lend itself to better hypertrophy type of stimulus in terms of gaining
time
muscle.
under tension.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many reasons why tempo work is beneficial, and I would argue that the average person not looking to compete in fitness for a living should be applying it to their strength training protocol like almost 100% of the time. Yeah.
Is 3 to 5 kind of
I agree.
the happy spot that you're living in then in force for the strength components as far as like how we're testing absolute strength in that program?
Yeah. We've been so far playing around in that rep range. I mean, there'll likely be opportunities to push people even beyond that. I don't think we'll ever go lower than 3 rep maxes or sets of 3, with our strength work. I just don't see any reason why you'd have to. But I think there's utility in pushing people beyond 5 reps also to develop just different types of strength. There's a whole spectrum of strength that you can develop. So I think you can push people out to 6 through 10, even 12, just to elicit a different type of response. Yeah. Now I think, and just to kind of pull it back to something that we were talking about before, in terms of the intensity piece, like I also don't want to, because you can potentially come away from that conversation thinking that
intensity is the only thing that matters.
Right.
Yeah.
And I just want to be clear that like there are days where it absolutely should be the intention to work at maximal intensity, right? And there should be days where the intention is to pull back on the intensity and make sure that we're not like going full throttle, depending upon the intention of the workout, right? And so that, to get back to what we were talking about earlier, that's why each day has a very clear intent in terms of what it is that we're trying to accomplish. And the way that we expose people to intensity within force has been through what we call like anaerobic power or anaerobic capacity intervals. And it's very specifically done through interval work, right? And so what the intervals allow you to do is you don't allow for opportunities to take breaks, to use too much weight, to take a chalk break, to get a sip of water. You have a very manageable amount of work that you need to get done as fast as possible. You program it in such a way that people can keep the output incredibly high. So the movements will be, the rep scheme, the movements, the loading will all lend themselves to a very high amount of output of constant activity and movement. And then there's a very deliberate period of rest that will allow you to recover and then repeat that same type of effort.
Yeah.
And you dose it such that the output never really drops down too low. So that's what drives the number of intervals that you would program. Is you want to ensure that it's just enough to elicit the response where the output can stay really high, but not so much that they start to fall off of that pace that you're looking for.
Yeah,
so,
a perfect example is actually we have a workout program for today, and I was reading through it, and I was like, I don't really know if I want to do this workout.
That's exactly. Yeah, there you go.
Response, yeah.
And I was like, But I think you hit the nail on the head. The workout is like it's squat cleans, burpees, and something else. It's
calories on the rower.
Calories on the rower.
Yeah.
And the way it's designed is just 30 seconds of work, 30 seconds of rest. And I'm reading it and I'm like, And then, what you're saying makes total sense, right? Is that you're able to push that threshold and then know that you have a calculated rest. And then again and again, it's almost like it's kind of like an EMOM, right? It's a way that I love to train. And so anyways, we're doing one of those today just to kind of back up what you're talking about. I'm excited about it.
Yeah. Well, I think, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Like if you take that workout and eliminate the intervals from it, right? The squat clean, the burpee, and the row, right?
Yeah, I think it's like, is it 50
chipper, right?
squat cleans, 50 burpees, 50 calories?
30, 40, 50.
30, 40, 50.
So 30 squat clean, 40 burpee, 50 calories. And if you look at that on the surface and just did it the way it was written, it's a totally different workout, right? Because now you're thinking about strategy, how you're going to break it up, how you're going to pace it. And I think that's, one of the struggles that I've had as someone that programs CrossFit workouts and teaches the methodology is that a lot of the workouts ultimately kind of end up just being, how well can I strategize this to finish it as fast as I can, but not like
blow it out of the
bleeding
water
from the eyeballs,
well,
right?
And,
So
and
it's
dude,
like,
I think the sport has actually gone that way.
Right.
You know, back in my day, it'd be, just all gas, no brakes.
Right.
Now you watch the athletes and they're very calculated, like heart rate monitors, timing, like they're really going through it like very methodical.
Right. And I mean, in terms of competing it for the purposes of sport, obviously that makes perfect sense.
Sure.
But for the average person at the gym, I mean, like, and for someone that's trying to elicit a certain response in terms of like the programming that you're putting forward, all the workouts just kind of end up looking the same because whether it's 5 minutes long or 20 minutes long, the approach is still just sort of like it's somewhere in the middle of like really high output, not really low, like somewhere like this middle ground where you're like kind of working hard, but not really working that hard. And it's like, well, what are we trying to accomplish here? Like, are we really trying to push the intensity, or are we trying to like back off the intensity and just have people work at a nice steady pace? Most of them fall somewhere in the middle, and you're never really touching the really, really high intensity stuff, and you're never really touching like the long, slow, deliberately moderate intensity stuff. You're always just kind of stuck in that middle ground, and then it's not very clear from one day to the next what the intention around the workout actually is. So I think that's that's one of the roles that those interval workouts will take, is that it's very clear, like around like the 30-second on, 30-second off format, just that simple little twist makes it very clear to the end user, like, oh, I'm supposed to push really hard for these 30 seconds, like as hard as I possibly can, recover to the best of my ability so I can repeat that same effort for that 30-second piece, right? And it's a totally different workout.
And I remember because on Fridays leading up to the Open, Dennis would program anaerobic intervals for like people that were like trying to excel in the Open. We used to do those every Friday, and man, it was a bloodbath every week. And like I was at the age where we like genuinely enjoyed that in some like weird dark way. But man, as you were explaining that, I was remembering some of the concoctions you came up with.
Yeah.
And
I think Szymanski fell asleep in a dumbbell rack one time.
Yeah.
During the rest period. He actually like was comatose in a dumbbell rack.
Yeah. And like brother Tom, like puking when he did the assault bike intervals. But one that I remember, and it just kind of like perfectly encapsulates everything you were talking about, like the movements, the rest. But when we did the 250 meter row, and then it was kettlebell swings, burpees, and then kettlebell swings, 250 meter row. And I forget the numbers. I think it's 15 kettlebell swings, like 10 burpees, 15, I think 250 meter row.
I think the burpees are higher, but yeah, I think it's 25 burpees.
And it was literally like, it's 4 minutes of like all out work. And again, you switch modality as soon as you start, like as soon as you can't really row at like an RP 10, boom, you go to kettlebell swings. As soon as the kettlebell swing starts to get like really tough, boom, you go to burpees. And then it's 4 minutes of like all out, and then you rest 10 minutes. And then you do that like 3 or 4 times?
Yeah, I think we did 3 times.
Oh,
yeah.
dude.
I mean, one of the hardest workouts I ever did on a track was with Hinshaw, 800 meters on. So it was 800 meters on, 1-to-1 work to rest. So my goal was a 3-minute 800, 3 minutes off for 10 rounds. So it was a 3-minute 800, which is a 6-minute mile, right?
Yeah.
Then you'd rest the equivalent.
Yeah.
And dude, that one, like I was like, I mean, like 258, 259, I'd be like diving for the finish line, trying to get there. And anyways, but those type of workouts are tough.
Yeah. What makes that time domain so unique? The 3 to 5 minute time domain.
Oh gosh.
Well, I mean, in that time domain, now you're bleeding into like your anaerobic threshold. That your anaerobic system will tolerate 90 seconds to a minute. Minute to 90 seconds of like really like full on high powered work. And then it starts to bleed into like the aerobic system having to take over. So when you're in that like 2-3 minute, you're in this weird, like your system is sort of like trying to figure out how to keep providing the output and what system is going to take over to provide the most energy. And it's just the suckiest of all sucks. Right. And so, I can't, and it's probably not even appropriate to talk from a physiological perspective exactly what's going on. But anyone that's experienced that type of stuff understands.
They know.
Something hideous under the hood is taking place.
Yeah, but it's interesting the way you could sneak in the intensity. So, not to go off too much on this workout, but using this workout as an example, right? You're right. If you saw a workout on paper, That was 30 squat cleans.
By the way, now that we talked about it, we've like cemented that that's what we're doing afterwards.
Well, I thought that we already got a workout brief, and that's like what we're supposed to be doing.
Who's we, by the way?
Well, I wrote it. I sent it to you guys to sign off on it.
6-hour plane ride.
So, but I think you bring up a really good point, and that's one of the reasons why I think it's great that you're incorporated into the programming philosophy, because you're doing things that, like, I also think having multiple people involved in programs is important, because you start looking at it through a different lens. Like if I saw that, like, yeah, you're right. 30, 40, 50 is a completely different workout than 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. Because now you're thinking, all right, I'm going to grab onto that bar. I'm not going to let it go for 30 seconds. I'm going to get, I don't know, 6, 7 reps.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're going to get to your burpees. You're going to do what? Maybe 10 to 14, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's going to be a fast and just like boom.
Yep.
And so I think it's great that you're programming workouts like that, because it encourages someone to kind of, throttle it up, but then get that recovered rest. And then also they can compare their numbers to previous times. So like if your first round, you get 10 burpees, and your next round you get 5, that might be an area that individual needs to work on, right? Like from a conditioning or muscle stamina perspective. Like my favorite is my 15 burpees every minute for 10 minutes is still like my favorite thing that I do with different groups.
Yeah. That's.
And then on the other side of the spectrum, because I've, I look at force all the time.
Zone 2, right?
Yeah, like the longer aerobic work. I think that also like warrants talking about a little bit, because I mean, dude, the amount of like things I did wrong while I was training as like a young, whatever. But I remember we used to do the aerobic intervals too. And it was like, hey, don't go all out on this. Like, don't go crazy. And of course, that's like exactly what you did.
That's exactly what you do.
Because everything back then was like, can I get more calories than like, the other people that are doing it? And now actually what's been really cool is, I told Jason this, so I'm actually working with a coach to train for the marathon.
Right.
In the past, like when I've done running, I've also done it all wrong, because that's how I approached it. Every time I went out to run, it was like, all right, last time I ran 730 miles. Today, I got to run 725s. Next time, because that's me getting better every time.
Yep.
But when you're trying to train the aerobic system, like now I'm honestly doing, and anyone that's a runner like knows this, like the 80-20, 80% of my runs are easy. Conversational pace. I'm listening to a podcast. Like it's all good. Once a week, I do something that's really, really gnarly. And then once a week, I do a long run that's like, it's not an easy pace, but it's supposed to be a steady pace. So something a little bit more. In force, you have the aerobic conditioning once a week.
Yeah.
How are people supposed to approach that, and why? Like, why is it so important? Like if you go out and, hit the 1200s on the track, but you're doing them hard, and then the next day you're doing, the workout we were just talking about, the 30-second intervals. Why is that counterproductive versus like the one day being a little bit easier and then going and doing the 30-second interval?
Yeah. So, I mean, there are aerobic adaptations that take place that when you train in such a way that you're tapping into your anaerobic system, those aerobic adaptations cease to actually take place within the body, right? So if even if a workout takes 30 minutes, right? It's a 30-minute AMRAP of kettlebell swings and box jumps and burpees. Like if you're pushing into the anaerobic system throughout those 30 minutes, you're still not eliciting the aerobic response and the aerobic adaptations that you'd want, right?
What would be a immediate, like, so yesterday I did a 30-minute workout, because just to dive in on this, it was a 400-meter run, some sandbag work, some shooting, rinse and repeat for 30 minutes.
Yep.
Is the sign of me kind of getting into different energy systems that I'm not trying to get into? I mean, yesterday wasn't necessarily the best example, but an example is that I couldn't have like a conversational pace. Is that my body would not be sustainable at that particular pace?
Yes.
So I'm getting into a different energy system because of that?
Right. I mean, heart rate is really going to be the best actual like physiological indicator of that. But you'd have to know what your anaerobic threshold is in terms of corresponding to your heart rate. You'd have to be able to track your heart rate during the workout and just be in touch with it the entire time to keep it below that threshold. That's the best way to actually know for sure that you're staying aerobic.
Okay.
I mean, but you can use other things like, I mean, just respiration, your respiration rate, your breathing rate is an indication of that. Whether or not you can talk is an indication of that. There's other signs physically. And, it's not always going to be perfect, but you can at least gauge how hard you're pushing into that anaerobic system based around those things. But to put it as simply as possible, there are certain adaptations that take place when you train aerobically and you train the aerobic system that otherwise don't take place when you train anaerobically. And if you want to elicit those responses in your body, you have to spend some time going just long and easy. And it's tricky because, especially programming it within the force, within the app, it's like, and I think we've long fallen victim to this within the CrossFit community in general, is that type of training just looks boring. It's not exciting. It's not sexy. People look at it and they're like, I'm not going to do this, right? Like, and the classic example is the 5K run, right?
Yeah.
It's the most programmed workout on CrossFit.com in its history, and it's probably the least performed workout in CrossFit.com history, right? But there's a very specific intent around those particular workouts because you can elicit a certain response within the body that you otherwise can't elicit. That is really important, not for performance purposes, but for health and the ability of the body to recover from hard efforts, the ability to actually recover within hard efforts. So like in that example you gave, within that workout, if you pushed into your anaerobic system at some point, let's just say it was during something involving the sandbag, right? Because the intensity bumps up a little higher. The more powerful your aerobic system is and the better the capacity there, the easier it's going to be and the quicker you'll be able to recover from that hard effort to be able to then replicate another hard effort, within a shorter time frame, because your recoverability from that hard effort is better because you have a strong aerobic system, right? And you see it all the time. I mean, CrossFit's a great example of this. The people that end up on the podium are the ones that have the best aerobic capacity. End of story, right? I mean, they obviously have all the skills and the bells and whistles as well, and they're strong and capable. But at the end of the day, the people that end up winning are the ones that have the best aerobic system.
Because in a lot of the CrossFit workouts, I never thought about it that way, but it's so true. There are always going to be moments in the workouts that are going to spike your heart rate more than others.
Right.
There's going to be the sandbag like him doing yesterday, and being able to then continue to move on to something else, whether it's the 400-meter run or the shooting. Like, I think this is super relevant to tactical games because you're going to be doing movements that are going to make you spike. And a huge advantage is going to be how quick can you kind of get back to like a level of baseline that allows you to put shots down range. And that, to what you're saying is your aerobic system.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing it firsthand right now at the tactical games. It's been really interesting because like yesterday's workout, again, is a really good example. You're running 400 meters. Your heart rate's kind of spiking because you're wearing a vest too. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit compressing your chest. Then you go through the sandbag and like, dude, instantly, whenever you touch a weight, I don't know if this happens for you guys, but like my heart rate spikes, right? Because like
definitely happens for me.
You can't control your breathing as well. You're manipulating an external load. Like, dude, it gets hard, right? Mm-hmm. And then you get on the shots. So I'm going on the shots, and for me, it's like it's been really cool to see how right before I get up to the line, just some nice deep breaths, and I'm actually able to really, I think, get my heart rate back under control better than most because of all the anaerobic training that I'm doing. Yeah. Because if you get on a target and you can't breathe, dude, it's impossible to find the target. You're just like out of your mind,
Yeah.
So.
All right, we're going to take a quick pause from the podcast here to talk about the Train Hard app and everything we have coming up in the month of August. So we just launched a sand program. So for anyone that's just been on the fence about joining and doesn't quite have the access to the equipment, maybe you don't have the time, the space to dive into Force, Flex, and the other programs that are a part of the Train Hard app, we've taken away all the excuses. We now have a program. It's 10 weeks, 4 workouts per week that require one piece of equipment alone that you can also get right on the Train Hard shop. We are making it so easy. We partnered up with GoRuck. We have their sandbags available on the Train Hard shop. These things are so durable. It's going to last you for years and years. So you should feel good about making the investment with such a versatile piece of fitness equipment that you can also take with you on trips so that you have no excuses and you never let your momentum get to zero. So the sand program is 10 weeks, 4 workouts per week. There are intervals, there's mixed modal days, there's longer conditioning days, there are short, spicy workouts. You get a little bit of everything so that in those 10 weeks, you can absolutely improve your fitness, improve your conditioning, improve your body composition with a program that's so simple and only requires one piece of equipment. So if you've been on the fence, you now don't have an excuse. grab the sand program from the Train Hard shop. It's also available as part of the Train Hard app. So if you're on the Train Hard app and you just want to change things up, boom, you have access to sand there. We also have a new cycle coming up in Flex that is going to get you so strong. So we have nothing but good things coming here in the month of August. Check out the Train Hard app, check out the Train Hard shop, check out the sand program. Let's get back to the podcast.
Here's the thing. We were talking about this with Thomas DeLauer, was it? Where he used a heart rate monitor because he would start rucking and he'd find himself like fast rucking because I think there's two sides of this coin. We've talked about people who don't want to get intensity. Mm-hmm. And then you obviously want to talk about this idea like, hey, okay, you can't be the guy who just wants to go intense all the time. And you can't be the guy who doesn't want to ever expose himself to intensity. You got to have both.
Right.
But on zone 2, on these longer workouts for force, how do people like almost check their ego to like actually get the stimulus we're talking about? Because that I think that's harder than maybe going hard for me.
Yeah. Same.
Right? Like,
yeah. I mean, it's a highly individual process. I mean, the heart rate monitor is one of the best indications, right? Of that. But outside of that, paying attention to respiration, paying attention to your ability to sustain movement, right? So like typically if you end up pushing too hard, you're going to have to follow that up with some sort of break. You're going to have to just stop moving, stop performing the movements, take a little bit of a rest, whatever that looks like, 5 seconds with your hands on your knees, a few deep breaths before you transition to the next movement. Like that's generally a sign that your body's like trying to recover from that effort that was a little bit too hard. So trying to avoid those types of little scenarios that could take place within a workout is going to be, for the average person, the best way to ensure that they're staying below a certain threshold. Now, the tricky thing with this is, and I mentioned this earlier, like the fact that these workouts are not very sexy. Like, I think you're trying to find this, you're striking this balance with programming workouts, and I'm sure you experience this with Flex. Like, do you want the workouts to be entertaining, or do you want the workouts to be effective, right? And so you got to blend. You got to blend it, right? Like you don't want to create a workout that people look at and they're just like, I don't feel like doing this, right? Like, I'm not gonna bother. Like, why should I bother? Like, and there's something to be said for like people being excited to actually perform a workout, but to be able to blend those two things together is really, really tricky, right? Like to find workouts that people can look at on paper and say, this is something that I really want to like actually do. But to ensure that you're not just creating workouts that are for entertainment purposes, that are getting people like excited, that are actually effective and eliciting the response that you want. So that therein lies the trick.
But it's so hard. And I can share this now too, in that it gets also harder when you feel like you've had people on this ride with you for now 3/4 of a year, because you also feel like you have to have some novelty to it. Like the stuff we did in January in Flex would absolutely work to do again. Like that, like it works. We're doing, like good movements and going to failure, and we're progressing through 6 weeks. But I know that that's where you start getting into that balance where like people will just be like, well, we're just doing the same thing we're doing in January. Right. Like, yeah, because it worked in January. It's going to work now again. Right. But like when is it okay to start doing stuff again versus like, when do I have to like, find the other rep scheme that's just going to get people super excited? Like people loved when we did the 3-7 stuff. It was like 3-4, like people love that. And it's great. It's a good way to, elicit that response. But now it's like people want something else that gives them that pump or that feeling of like, man, like I did really good work. And at some point you just like, you run out of ideas. Right. And I follow the training. Like I want to go back to some of the stuff I did in January because that felt good. And it has been tough because you're kind of like thinking about like, man, like at what point is it appropriate to keep it interesting to go back to some of the things that like honestly are great and work.
Right. But I think it has to stay interesting though. Right. Like,
for sure.
I think that one of the reasons why both of you guys are so unique at helping in the programming side is because you can look at it through different lenses. One is the athlete lens because you guys are doing the workouts. The other is the like the coach lens in the sense like if you own a gym and you put out the most effective workouts in the world, but no one ever wants to go, you're not actually helping anybody because no one's going to want to come in. So they're not going to get the consistency they need to actually see results. And so like, what does your process look like for that? Because you're threading this line, right, between effectiveness and fun. And there's going to be, some days might be a little bit more than the others, but like, What does that thought process look like for you? Is it after you test a workout, you're like, dude, that was pretty boring. Like we should probably throw in like something or, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I've been doing this long enough, I think, and I have enough years under my belt of doing these workouts and programming these workouts that I can look at a workout even before I do it and have a pretty good sense of like whether it's effective, just based around like the volume, the movements, the loading, etc. But also, is it going to be something that's like interesting to do? Like, is this, when I look at a workout, I use myself as kind of the gauge, and I just say, is this something that I want to do?
Right.
And if the answer is like absolutely no, and not just because like it's not something I'm good at, like, you know, I suck at running, but I'll still run, you know. But like it's just, you look at it and you just kind of like, I just have no interest in actually doing this workout. Then generally I'll try to steer away from that and just try to change something about it.
Yeah, and I think that's okay. Like yesterday, I was at a gym and like I saw pistols come up, and like if you want to learn that skill and that's something you want to do, like I think having pistols in the workout is awesome. But I'm at a place for me and my training, like I have zero interest in ever doing another pistol again.
Yeah.
I feel like my knee's just gonna fly out the front of it.
Right.
And so it's just not exciting for me. And
Wait till you're 46.
Right. But I think it's okay to be like, bro, like, dude, I'm trying to get in all my different patterns, push, pull, squatting each week. And there's a variety of ways to do that. But I want to make sure that like, if you're excited, other people are excited. And I'm excited because I'm doing the workouts too, you know?
Right.
And
How much of the interesting novelty, exciting factor is also just using different implements for the same movements? And then, you know, we go back to having to balance that. Like how much of that then is realistic when, you know, someone is potentially following this in a garage gym and isn't going to have access to kettlebells and dumbbells and sandbags and this? Because I know in your own training, like you really lean into kettlebells and sandbags because you've been doing it for a really long time.
Yep.
But how much is that, I guess, just the novelty of changing up the implement that you're using, or how much of that is just like you should be using different things because that has its benefits too?
I think both. I think the answer to that is there's two sides of that, right? Part of it is the novelty of just using a different piece of equipment to provide a different stimulus, to learn a new skill, to just, you know, increase the level of interest in actually performing the movements, finding pieces of equipment that fit better for you just based around your strengths, weaknesses, body type, and avoiding pieces of equipment or movements that just don't, right? So the pistol's an example of that, right? Like that just doesn't fit. It's just not in line with physically what you are comfortable doing at this point and physically what you want to be able to actually do. But then also, you know, incorporating variety for variety's sake can be really beneficial as well. And a big part of that can just be modifying the piece of equipment that you use for a particular movement or a certain workout, especially if you've performed that movement or that workout enough times where you're like, all right, I've kind of like squeezed all the juice out of this thing. I don't really see myself progressing anymore. And like, so why don't I just change the stimulus in some way to actually make it novel, not only mentally, but also physically, right?
Yeah.
So like, like the other day in class, we did front squats. And like front squats are a tremendously valuable exercise. And I think that everyone should do them. But the idea around putting the barbell on my collarbones and going like, you know, 300 plus pounds for a double on a front squat right now is just like,
were you wearing
not
a
that
belt or
exciting
no
to
belt?
me. No belt. I never wear a belt.
Oh gosh, here we go. I'm wearing a belt, a 50-pound dumbbell. I'm wearing a belt. No,
But I mean, but so what I did instead was I did sandbag squats, right? And just, I mean, the stimulus was just as potent, just as effective. Just for me, less demand on my knees and just my spine, and it just feels better for me when I do it that way. And so, you know, I was able to take what otherwise would have been probably a less impactful training session for me and turn it into something that I was excited to do. So, you know, it's just one example of how you can do that. Obviously, within force, you know, we have certain limitations within that, understanding that not everybody has access to sandbags and kettlebells, and they have the ability to really utilize different pieces of equipment. But I think the more people can on their own incorporate that type of stuff,
yeah,
the better, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think that if you're listening to this podcast and you have some money, like just a little bit set aside, go invest into some equipment. Because equipment's going to last pretty much forever. I mean, if you get a good sandbag, if you get a good kettlebell, like that thing is not like deteriorating. Like,
Yeah.
and so, you know, I think for Christmas, ask your spouse, ask your significant other to get you some of that gear, because what you're talking about, Dennis, is like you and I and Gabe, like, dude, again, at your age, like you've been training hard for what, 30 years, 20 or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, I got introduced to the fitness space when I was 15, 16. I'm 38, coming on 39. Like, bro, after a while, you gotta ask yourself, like, hey, what's gonna keep me inspired? What's gonna keep me fired up? And if it's using a kettlebell instead of a barbell that day, fuck yeah, like let's do it, you know?
Yeah.
But having access to that equipment, I think, is really important. So I'd encourage you guys to go out and spend a couple of bucks on these things because you'll have them for the rest of your life.
Yeah. I mean, we've held the barbell up on a pedestal as being this just indispensable piece of equipment that everyone has to use in order to develop strength and develop proper conditioning. But what is so magical about a barbell other than convenience and easy loadability?
Easily to load, right?
Yeah. But you know, if you look at it from just like a historical perspective of lifting things off the ground, like,
Right.
it's totally unnatural. There's nothing like it in nature.
Right. Nothing's that
we've
uniform,
ever
that
picked up.
balanced.
Right. So it's like, you know, like I think there's tremendous utility in expanding your horizons beyond the idea that like I need to lift a barbell in order to get strong and in order to be functional and in order to actually develop conditioning. Like there's much, you could argue what's more effective ultimately. But I think people need to think outside the box a little bit as far as the tools they use.
And I think that that's a really good takeaway, regardless of if you're following Force, Flex, or anything else, is being open-minded to changing up the equipment and not getting, I feel like people get very caught up on two things. One, like warm-ups, and two, exactly that. Like, hey, this says to use dumbbells.
Right.
If I use kettlebells, I'm not going to get out of it what I'm supposed to get out of it. If I, God forbid you bench press with a sandbag, I'm not going to get out of it what I'm supposed to get out of it. These are all options that are slightly different and are still going to push you in the right direction.
For sure.
People get very caught up, and we can have the discussion about warm-ups too. Alec, who you introduced me and who I want to have on the podcast, is really big on this, but just people getting so caught up on like, what do I need to activate, mobilize, warm up to do this? Mm-hmm. And how much time that takes away when most people are very time constrained in their training. Like they're spending all this time like trying to figure out what the magic thing is to like prep for their squat session instead of just squatting. Or eventually like having to take time off the back end of the other things that they should be doing instead of just warming up.
I mean, I haven't touched a barbell. I mean, I'm going to probably touch one today. I have not touched a barbell in 40 days. I mean, at least for sure, at least probably a month. I haven't touched a barbell. Mm-hmm. I've only been using sandbags.
Because you've been traveling, you've been training for tactical games.
I've only been using dumbbells and sandbags in the last month. Wow. Yeah, I mean, but that's a good example, right? Is you don't always have access to these things, and switching it up, I think, is great, man. And like, I really appreciate your insight on the Force program. I appreciate both of you guys, because I think having people that are authentic to the message of what we're trying to get across, and then really looking at like through the lens of like, do I want to do this? I think it's super helpful because, like you trying to, get jacked and run a marathon, and you're putting out a program that's like about that, or
trying to get jacked.
Or like both. God damn it. But like, dude, if I mean, look, obviously, I'm going to pitch this thing hard, but like, if you're not on the Train Hard app and you're a dude who wants to train, protect, provide, like, I don't know a better solution. I don't. Like, there's just too many years of educated individuals that are a part of our programs that are putting out fun and effective stuff that I think is going to help you guys get to where you want to be. Because I know it's helping me. I mean, I feel like I'm in better shape today overall than I have been in a really long time. Like, yeah, I'm not like CrossFit Games shape, but I'm like train, protect, provide shape.
Hell yeah.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing when you bring that up is, quantifiably, I don't think I could hit any of the numbers on like, CrossFit tests or strength tests than I was when I was back at CrossFit Garden City. But I would say the same thing. Like, I think that I look better. I most definitely feel better. Nothing really aches. I'm more capable. I don't think that even on the running side, which I just picked back up, I think that I'm running significantly better now. And even the goal that I have for my marathon is something that I wouldn't have thought of doing when I was a triathlete, when I was like literally doing endurance stuff. So I would say that I'm a lot more well-rounded now than when, I'd probably be able to place higher on the leaderboard in the open. I think that's interesting and pretty telling too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Yeah, it just depends on the individuals and their goals. And I think that for us, as we've aged, our goals have evolved. And I think being open-minded to that is fine. And if you want to compete in the sport of CrossFit, you got to go find a program that's going to help you get there.
Right.
But that's not going to be one that we're going to be doing with handstand push-ups and full snatches. And that's okay. Like if that's what someone wants to do. You know, right now the Masters competition, I think, is coming up at the CrossFit Games.
This
This weekend.
It's this weekend.
Yep.
Oh, this is what your buddy's competing in? No, that's the adaptive.
No,
I'm
he's
sorry.
adapted. But
That's
we have a really good friend that's competing in this too, Mike Kern from our gym.
And where is that at again?
They're in Alabama.
Alabama?
Yeah, Alabama this year.
Oh,
Yeah.
did they end up doing it in Birmingham?
Birmingham, I believe. Yeah.
Oh, that was where the CrossFit Games were supposed to be before Texas?
It was like one of the places that was on the short list, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
So you came into California. You flew pretty far from New York. What do you do on travel days? Because right now it's I don't know, what time is it? 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock?
It's 1 Pacific.
When did you leave your house?
Geez. My flight was 7:30. I left my house at 5:30 a.m.
Which would be 2:30 Pacific.
Yeah.
2:30 Pacific time. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And so what are you thinking? Because you've traveled a lot for seminars and stuff. Like what goes through your mind when it comes to like preparation and travel? Like what do you, because I saw you come to our house. I'm trying to offer you like a coffee and a drumstick or something. And you're like, like figure fouring your leg or something. Like, I don't even know what you're doing, but you're like doing some like yoga stuff in the corner. What's
Did
happening?
you miss the part where we said that I was 46? Did you miss that part?
I mean,
I was sitting for 6 hours.
I mean, you look 30.
Like a pretzel.
It's your fault, not mine, because you look so young.
Right on.
But what do you think about?
I mean, try to get some kind of movement in on a day where I'm traveling. Some easy movement.
Oh, we're going to get some movement in.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't look like squat, clean, burpee, row intervals, but some kind of movement.
Yeah.
On
Okay.
a day like this. Yeah. Otherwise, I mean, just to get your head right, to get some blood flowing. Nothing hard. Well, that remains to be seen. Ultimately, what we do here, but try to get some movement in.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, dude. Movement's medicine.
That's it. Yeah.
So I know that this is a big piece for you. And last question on the like entertainment aspect, or just the aspect of training that gets people motivated to do it and do it consistently. I know you always want to have something that you're training for. I'm kind of the same way. Like if I'm just kind of like training to train, like still motivated, enjoy it, go do it. But like as soon as like I sign up for something and I put it on my calendar and it's there, like I just go to like another level of, for me now, not even going harder, but just being more disciplined and really trying to follow a plan and so on and so forth. Has that been a big part for you? Because I know that you, if anything, have been kind of reluctant to like actually sign up for stuff and do that. Like that seems like it's not a big motivator for you.
Yeah.
If that isn't it, what is? And do you think that most people would benefit from constantly having like a 6 to 9 month, 3 month North Star that they're constantly aiming for?
I think it depends on the person, right? I think some people are competitive by nature. They do well with like objective goals, objective deadlines, call it, for like trying to accomplish something and train for something and prepare for it. I've never been that type of person. I've always trained just for the love of training, and just to be able to see physically, mentally what I'm capable of doing and what I'm able to kind of put myself through, so to speak. So I think it depends upon the person. I think there's tremendous utility in establishing goals, establishing deadlines, establishing like actual things that you're going to compete in. But not everyone responds favorably to that. So I think it just depends on the person.
What do you think about Total Archery Challenge?
I don't know how to answer that question. I would assume that means like shooting a
bow and arrow. Yeah.
And for competition purposes.
Yeah.
I think competing in anything is great.
Do you want to do one in 2025?
Let's talk offline. And
I'm trying to
details
get.
around.
Have you ever shot a bow?
No.
Yeah,
Never.
nice.
Oh, I got one. We're gonna go shoot it after this.
Right on. I'm down.
But following up on that question, then,
Okay.
how are you ever testing with your training, and are you doing that at a specific interval? Like, are you ever, hey, in 3 months, I want to test? We talked about 1 rep max not being indicative, testing my 3 rep max, 5 rep max in something, or a test workout. And then aside from that, are you building that into force in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, I mean, me personally, no. My days of testing, I think, are done within fitness, right?
Right.
Like at this point, I'm just trying to mitigate the downward slope, right? And so like the purpose of testing is sort of like futile, and that like everything is going to be going down. Or maybe if I'm lucky, they're holding steady. But you know what? But that being said, there probably are still certain capacities that I can improve in that I never really spent enough time actually working on. You know, so like running long distances, for example, I bet you if I actually put some work into that right now, I could see pretty dramatic improvements because I just never really put a whole lot of time into it, right? So, you know, there are certain capacities that still probably could be improved despite my training age, despite my just biological age. Whether or not I have an interest in actually building them up and testing them is another story. But within force, you know, I think you need to scratch that itch for people that respond favorably to that. So I think there needs to be some sort of like regular testing of certain capacities, certain movements that take place on, call it like a quarterly basis or something like that.
Yeah. That's a really good way to put it. I mean, for me, it's like, I remember when I finished competing at the CrossFit Games and I'd want to like go test something. I'd be like, bro, there is no way I'm getting back to a 300-pound snatch. And it was almost like deflating. And I think people can relate to this, like who've been training for a while, like they feel deflated because they're never going to get back to where they were. And so it almost like, it becomes hard to motivate yourself because you just feel like I'm never going to get there. So instead, this mindset of like, hey, I'm trying to keep my numbers as high as possible for as long as possible is my goal, while simultaneously becoming better in other areas. Like, dude, I mean, I could become a better shooter, a better grappler, a better this, a better that. And to your point, like, dude, you might be able to set a mile PR if you wanted to. Because you didn't focus on that. You know, like Gabe's going to do his first marathon and you're going to set a PR at 30 whatever years old. You know, so I think that if you are training, you want something to focus on, you can use our programs as a really good like general prep, right? Like to kind of keep your overall fitness. And then if you have something specific, you can go out there and do it. In addition, like we're doing a High Rocks. I'm trying to kick High Rocks ass.
That's right.
Like it's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
You got to get running, big guy.
Dude, you know, it's 8K of running.
I know exactly what it is. Yeah.
Do you want to do one sometime? Yeah. Let's talk about it offline.
We'll move that one offline as well.
Yeah. Perfect. Awesome, man. Well, dude, Dennis, we appreciate you being out here in California. We're gonna,
great to be here.
Do some workouts, do some stuff. But I like talking to you about fitness because I like always like hearing different concepts and ideas. Obviously, we come from a similar background, but like this idea of like what you shared about the intensity side and adaptations and whatnot, I thought we had a lot of great takeaways. And the fact that you came on the team and are supporting with force, I can't think of a better guy to help us on that journey. So
appreciate
that. Say thank you.
Yep. Honored to be part of the team.
Let's go.
Hey, well, if you get value from this podcast, simple ask. And Gabe and I, we're saying this in person. We have a lot of people listening to this podcast and we need ratings and reviews to help grow it. Share this with a friend, leave the podcast a rating and review, and just keep training hard. See you guys again next week for another great episode.